Susan.
Hi, Seal. Look at this. We can see
I
each
know.
other, and other people can see us too.
Yes. You are in your office at Workroom Tech, and I am in my home office.
Yeah.
Why are we on video today?
Well, for today's podcast, I wanted to show pictures,
Yeah.
and it's kind of hard to do that by describing the picture to your podcast listeners.
I think we do a pretty good job most of the time, but especially
But
for what we're talking about today.
today's topic is become a drapery detective. And that's about how to investigate and deconstruct a window treatment from a photo. So, how many times have you received a photo and as inspiration from an interior designer or from a customer, and you're like, sure, I can do that, whether you know you can or not?
Yeah. Because we have such confidence in ourselves, we can figure this out.
Yes, we just did a podcast about confidence. So now
Yes,
we're
we
all
did.
confident now, but what do you do? So you take that picture and you have to figure out, well, how much fullness is it? How many widths is it? How would I construct that? How would I install that? Uh, how many parts is it?
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about that today. And so the first thing would be deconstruct. So you're looking at the picture and you're sort of mentally taking it apart.
Right.
And are there different parts to it? Is there a cornice element? Is there a swag element? Is there uh, some relaxed elements,
Right.
right? Is there a
Is there
box
a jabot?
sleeve? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a jabot? Are there parts you can sort of take apart? Are there already things you know how to make in
Mhm.
that part, right? And then kind of look at the parts individually, and that'll help you to sort of get your mind around it.
Right.
And then there's investigate and think to yourself or look for clues. Where did the photo come from? Does it have a copyright? Is it from a magazine or a book? Is it from a blog post? Is it from a supplier, like a drapery hardware company?
Mhm.
I know there's a Brimar photo that people share all the time that has those knots on the cleats, right?
Yes.
From our
Yes.
hardware. And so start doing a little investigating, Google images and things like that to find more information.
Mhm.
And you might find a lot of information. You might not find anything, but it's worth it. And also look at the photo and go, is this a real photo from a real home?
Right.
Which would be like a magazine photo, or is it a staged photo, like a catalog photo?
Right.
And a lot of times those staged photos are not IRL.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they could have binder clips and duct tape behind them to make
Yes,
them
they
look
could.
perfect.
Or they could be AI, or they could be
Oh,
completely photoshopped. Like
yeah.
you really have to take a look at things.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the AI. That's a whole new
Yes.
element to this, isn't
Yes.
it? And then also when you're investigating, look at it and go, is there a pattern for this? If it's a
Often
top
there is.
treatment, there are so many top treatment patterns out there. And then you want to verify the facts. What are your measurements, right? You have a picture, but does that translate to the size window that you're working on? Has fabric been selected? Maybe they can't do what they want to do with the fabric they've selected. They selected a velvet upholstery fabric and they want to make something soft and sheared and swoopy, but no, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
The budget could change everything. So you don't want to invest a lot of time into research until you know if they can even do the project.
Right.
Um, so will that inspiration photo work for their space? All right. So that's deconstruct, investigate, verify, and use your expertise and experience. So when
Yes.
you're looking at something that you've never made before, as a drapery workroom, you can kind of tell whether it's black outlined, whether it's
Mhm.
interlined, whether it's 1.5 or 2 times fullness, or whether it's 3 times fullness. You get to learn these things just by being a workroom professional.
reading your notes for the podcast today, it's so funny because the first thing you said about one of the photographs that you're going to share in a couple minutes is there's no light coming through. So it's either French blackout or blackout. And I have some pictures of some work I did in the early days. That you can see the square of the window behind the panels because I had recommended blackout. It wasn't what the designer wanted. And then after we did that job, from there on out, we did Bell and OJ blackout. And she didn't want blackout in the valances that were over it. And you can see the pleats. And it was one of those things where I was still new in the business and I didn't stand my ground. I had good reasons for wanting to use it. And from there on in, I said, oh, I only do black outlining on my valance. And here's why. And I show that picture
I
and
have a
I'm
photo
good.
to share with you.
Yeah.
I mean, things like, is the fabric from the picture, you might be able to tell whether the fabric, like on a box pleat valance, was railroaded or not.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that you can get clues from just from being in the workroom, working with fabrics and linings and supplies, welt cord and different types of room and shade components and all. I'm blowing up the picture and looking on the side of the room and shades to see, is there a bead chain loop? How did they make that work? And then lastly is to determine the proportions. And I use very simple techniques to do that. You can use something called a proportional scale. I have one right here.
Okay.
And I haven't used this in many, many years, so I've forgotten how it works. But this is a proportional scale.
Okay.
And you take a measurement on a photo and you put the measurement on one part of the wheel and then you spin the other part of the wheel and it helps you to learn the proportions. But what I do is print out a photo on graph paper. And so that's what I'm going to show you today.
Oh,
So
that's so smart.
we're going to do some examples of drapery detective work. Ooh. So I have to share my screen so we can get started.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that is so pretty.
Isn't that pretty?
It really is.
So this is a photo from Calico Corners. And the questions that I would want, for my customer, if I was given this photo as an inspiration photo, the first thing I'm going to do is look at it and go, what do I know from this photo? So is light bleeding through? Doesn't look like it. So
it does not.
Possibly black outlined. There's fringe on the leading edge. It has Euro pleats. I know it has one with the material each side or each panel. And that's because I can count the pleats. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pleats, 5 pleats per width. And the folds look very soft, so it's possibly interlined. But it's really difficult to see the hardware in this photo because it's black hardware on, dark walls, walnut color walls. It kind of looks like an iron rod and maybe short rods in it, but there's a light fixture in the way. So I'm not going to worry so much about the hardware. But just I've got all this information now that I can start figuring a quote based on the customer's window. But if I wanted to learn a little bit more, I would go, okay, this is Calico Corners. I bet they have some more information online. So with a pretty easy Google search, I found more information, and that is here. This blog post shows these same draperies and the homeowners home on the left, and then they moved. So the whole blog post is about moving the draperies to a new home.
Okay.
Yeah. And I have the link up there. I don't know if I should click on it and go down that rabbit hole, but it's a really great blog post because she shows other draperies from the home that were repurposed.
Okay.
So, but now I can definitely see the type of hardware they've used, the probably like a 3/8 inch or 7/8 inch iron rod with French returns, and small rings.
French return, right?
Yeah. And again, single panels not functioning with, on the left, there's Roman shades, and then there's some type of shade on the other window too.
Right.
So anyway, so yeah, that was a good find, and I have lots of information, and I could feel pretty secure now if I needed to quote this job. And also on the blog, there was some close-up photos, and you could see the fringe.
Oh,
And the
nice.
fringe is, has a little gimp braid that's applied right to the leading edge. So it's not inset from the edge. So it
Okay.
wasn't stitched into the edge. So I would have to, in my quote, plan for an applied fringe of
Hmm.
whatever method that they are wanting, hand sewn or whatever. So yeah, so that's a pretty easy one, drapery. But the thing is with drapery is, if you want to know how many widths, use your drapery knowledge of
Right.
how many pleats per width. So on the left, that drapery has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pleats.
Okay.
And if you want an idea of how a 2-width drapery panel is going to look pleated and stacked back, there you go,
You
10
are.
pleats. So width and a half is one of the most common, and that's 7 pleats usually. And then for a grommet panel, you can count the folds between 2 grommets. So again, start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 grommets per width. So that's 4 folds per width. So if there's 8 folds, that means it's 2 widths.
Right.
So that's just good general basic knowledge. And I think a lot of people look at grommet panels, they can stack back so tight
Hmm.
that you need to see more than one width sometimes because they
Right.
look so skinny. And that photo was from Pottery Barn. Okay, so here's a little more challenging one. The draperies was easy, right?
Right.
So this is from designer Charlotte Moss, and it's a draped walls and windows combination.
Okay.
Some wall is exposed, some is
So much to
not.
look at in this
Oh
photograph.
my gosh. And the proportions are kind of weird. It's like either the bed's really, really tiny
Or it's a
or it's
really
a really
big
big
room.
room
Yeah.
because it looks like a little child's bed, which is kind of funny. Um, we can see that it is inverted pleats. So,
Right.
I can see that. It does have a little relaxed area between where it's pleated, not
Mhm.
exaggerated, just a little bit. So slightly draped. Um, I can't really tell by this photo how it's installed. So I can see light shining through, so it's not black outlined.
Right.
So let's zoom in a little bit. Oh, look, now I can see. There's
Okay.
It's installed on knobs. I doubt they just hammered those into the
I doubt they did
drum
too.
molding.
Sure, there's either a grommet hole or a buttonhole or something that looks very pretty.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that's probably buttonholes, and it also has a wide bias banding across the top that I might not have noticed from the overall room photo.
Right.
And just sort of based on knowledge of crown molding sizes, um, knowledge of this type of fabric, it's probably about a 4-inch. I,
Right. That would have been my guess.
yeah, I would say, 4-inch for that. So then it's to try to figure out how many widths are in each one of those sections.
Right.
So I printed it out on graph paper
Wow.
and looked for something in the room that I kind of knew the size of. So you can look at things like tabletops, mantletops, furniture, benches, chairs, lamps, things that have common sizes. In this case, the bed. So at first, because the bed looked so small in the room, I thought it was a double bed, which is 54 inches wide, I think they are generally. A queen size bed is 60. And I thought it was a double bed, but then I said, there's 2 Euro shams on there with to
Oh,
spare. So I
yes,
think it's a queen.
yes, agreed.
Yeah. So here's my detective work there. So I drew a line on the graph paper for 60 inches for a queen bed, counted how many squares, divided it, and it came up with each square 7.5 inches.
Oh,
So now I could count the squares across on a section of that drapery that's showing, and each section's about 30 inches. So I know I need at least one with the material for each section,
right,
and just start draping that around the room. And based on the project, every room isn't going to be like this room. So it might be for a customer, they just want this behind the bed or
right.
one wall. So now you can start going, okay, measure my space and see how many of these sections I can fit into that space. And that's how many widths I'm going to need.
Right. Wow, Susan, I've never considered printing on graph paper. This is awesome.
Yeah. And just do black and white. It doesn't have to be in color or
Right.
anything. Yeah. So it's a pretty interesting project, and I've never made anything like this. So
No, I haven't either.
so I don't think it'd be that hard, really. I think I could do it. And in the workroom, when I'm working, and if I got this project, I would drape a cord to determine exactly
Right,
how far apart all of those little knobs or medallions would be. But for our purposes for this podcast today is how to get the quote done. You
right.
know, just to not even figure out yet how I'm going to make it really, but just to get the quote done. How many elements are into it so I can figure my labor,
Mhm.
how much lining you're going to need, and uh, and you are thinking ahead about how it's going to be installed as well.
Right.
Actually, this would be a pretty simple job, I think. Just inverted pleats, bias across the top, and drape it.
And so pretty. But
Yeah.
Susan, we've talked about this recently. It would be fairly simple for those of us who have made multiple projects.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of those areas where it looks simple, but even determining how it's going to be installed, what elements are in it, and how much fabric requires our time and expertise. And this is where when someone, oh, this is going to be easy, it's just going to be fabric draped around the room, except it has the bias top, except it needs buttonholes. And these are the things where working with a custom workroom makes such a difference, because it will look like that photograph as opposed to somebody just stapling yards and yards of fabric to the
Right.
molding.
Yeah. That would be horrible. Um,
Oh, this is so pretty.
and this is Barry Dixon and Tears, one of my favorite designers. And um, I don't know who fabricated this, or it's been quite a few years. This is in the book, Barry Dixon Interiors.
Mhm.
And so if this was an inspiration photo from a customer, one of the things I would do is go, well, wow, these look like 10-foot ceilings.
Right,
So if you have 8-foot ceilings, I don't know if it's really going to work for you.
right, right.
We could scale it down, but it might not give you the same look. The drapery is very plush and has rounded folds.
Yeah,
Um, to me, that looks either bump interline or maybe French blackout because you don't see light coming through.
right.
And um, I can't see the drapery pleats, but I can start counting the folds that are coming
Yes.
from the top of the drapery down. And there are 7 vertical folds. So that means it's 1.5 widths each side,
Mm.
which may or may not traverse. Not sure. But there are sheer shades underneath, so
Right.
they have for privacy.
I'm thinking they
And
don't traverse because they have radiators
yeah, I don't think they do either.
or radiators, depending on where you grew up.
Radiators.
I say radiators too.
And then based on the furnishings again, just looking at the sofa and chairs, um, I'm pretty confident, and it's a historic home. It's in Virginia. I'm pretty confident they're 10-foot ceilings.
Mhm.
East. So I'm going to use that to determine my proportions. Just
Okay.
I'm going to say it's 10-foot, 10-foot ceilings. So let's say that brown paper, and print it out. And then each square, based on 10-foot ceiling, each square is 6 inches. So
Okay.
now I know the finished width of the valance is 60 inches. And then the jabots, the finished length of those is 42. So I'm starting to get a really nice proportion that I can use for the project that I would be working on.
Right.
I might have to adjust that in proportion based on the size of the window. I have the center point and the short point of the jabots is 22 to 24 inches. And then starting to think about how is it installed. You need to allow room for that too. And so you're working from the outside in. So what's the finished width of the draperies? Well, if you're going to have a cornice box or something up there, you need to deduct that
Right.
finished width of the drapery. And I sort of highlighted that you see the sort of the gold color at the top of the dotted line.
Mhm.
That I think there's a cornice box under there creating that arched shape. And
Okay.
it's like a tiara, like there's a piece of plywood on the front that
Right.
is higher than the rest of the cornice box.
Okay.
And that can get all stapled and covered with the fabric as it's brought up. And the jabots may or may not be separate pieces. It's really hard to tell by the photo. I don't have a close-up photo up underneath. You know, we wish we could look underneath.
Don't we though?
And then there are some slight pleats where it's been raised up
In the
just
corners.
slightly. Yeah, just slightly in the corner. So that's all things I can see from the photo to really help with quoting, but also to help with pattern making.
Right.
So I would want to make that cornice box and drape a pattern on it, or at least half of it, to
Right.
make a pattern for cutting the rest of the window treatment. That's pretty.
Wow. It is.
I know.
And it's interesting too, Susan, because whoever the workroom is who's interpreting this could have different interpretations of what we're looking at.
Exactly. And there's, you
Different
know,
ways
I
to
remember,
fabricate.
yeah, years ago, Beth Hodges and Margie Nance taught classes of left brain, right brain. And
Mhm.
I think Jill Stanbro and Beth or Margie did some left brain, right brain. And more recently, Donna Scoufis and Carlette Cormier did a class at CWC of
I
sort of,
took that class. I loved it.
yeah, the same style done 2 different ways. So you're using your knowledge from your skills and the way you do things in your workroom to figure out how it's going to be done. So yeah, it takes that experience,
Mhm.
puts it to work. Now here's a different type of shade. I wanted to put a shade in here, but you know, Roman shades are so straightforward. They're
Right.
rectangles. So this is a relaxed Roman shade, and it has horizontal folds
Mhm.
which are stitched in. Now, you're not sure whether the fabric was purchased that way or
Right.
it was sewn that way.
And that would make a difference in the quote, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. And then the swag in the center is pretty swoopy. And I
Right.
know from making relaxed shades that that requires fullness,
Mhm.
like a London shade would have fullness. And to get fullness, there's usually a pleat. And there's no pleats, you know, up and down.
Right.
So where you're getting your fullness on this shade is because it's got like wings on each end.
Right.
So,
Right.
so it's falling down like a tablecloth sort of on the corners.
Right.
So you can see that now. So the shade is made intentionally bigger than the
Right.
board. And then that falls down. And that gives you enough fullness to create a swag at the bottom. And I don't see a weight bar. I don't think you really need a weight bar with all that fullness coming down to
Right.
hold it out. So what do you think?
I don't think you need a weight bar, but I prefer a more structured. This is a very, what's the right word? Blousy, soft.
Mhm.
I think I'd want to put a weight bar in there to sort of get those horizontal fabric folds to just stretch out a little bit and lay a little bit flatter. I have some unstructured window treatments in my home, but I would want a little more structured than this. But if I was being asked to make it and make it look like this, I'd skip the weight bar.
I was going to say, but it's not for you.
Exactly. But I might express my opinion about it. It depends on who I'm working with.
Another clue in our detective work here is that there's a sort of an exposed bottom hem.
Yes.
And that's made by starting the rings up a little higher from the bottom.
And that hem is deeper than the folds.
Mm-hmm.
The pleats, I should say, the horizontal pleats. So it looks less opaque.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
I
got
think
a couple layers folded into it.
exactly. So it's probably 4 or 6 inches double folded
Right.
where the ring starts. So yeah, that's enough information to quote the project.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see any cord, so I'd say it's a stationary shade.
Most
And it could be installed on a board with Velcro. So easy,
yeah.
just put it up there. So yeah. So I'm acting like I don't know how this was made, but I made this. So actually, I do know exactly.
So, Susan, what I love about this is that it has all these soft folds in it. I love the fullness at the bottom.
Mhm.
I think that too often we're trying to save some fabric or save our clients money. And I'm counting the folds at the bottom. And I'm like, that is a nice, luscious amount of fabric
Yeah.
that's folded up in there.
And I don't remember exactly, but I can count 1, 2, 3, 4 folds.
Mhm.
So if you're doing, let's say 8-inch vertical ring spacing, you need to allow at least 24 inches
Right.
to the link to get that many folds. I like the way that the sides look on this style instead
Mhm.
of straight, like on a London shade or something, they kind of pull in a little bit. And this has from the side, it has a really pretty sort of a
It
jabot.
does. Very
But
soft.
this was made years ago when people wanted things a little more dressy and not as structured and plain,
Straight and
tailored.
flat.
Not so straight and flat.
Right.
Okay, so here's something that we get sometimes. It's a watercolor sketch. It's not real life.
Oh,
So
if only we could express that a little more loudly.
so the good news is when you get a drawing or a sketch, it's open to interpretation more so than a photo of an actual window treatment, I think.
No, I
Anyway.
agree with you because I'm sure that the person who did this drawing did not measure that edge where it's pulled up to make sure it matches the outer edge. They just
Right.
drew it the way they wanted it to look.
Right. Yeah. Right. And does it come down and match the other edge? So those are all questions. You'd be like, okay, your inspiration drawing, that's amazing. So let's talk about your expectations. Are you expecting to open and close this? If yes, how are we going to hook those tassels on so that it's not really difficult to do?
Right.
So you have to think about that. You have to think about the lining. It's going to show.
Yes, it is.
And in the inspiration picture, there's no hemmed lining on the back. So is this just like a sheer fabric,
Mhm.
one piece of fabric, with the edges finished? Is it lined, but it's all encased with a seam around at
Right.
least the leading edge and the bottom hem? And if it doesn't close and it's even across the bottom, has there been an allowance made to the front so that when it pulls up, you still have all that extra? In other words, is the leading edge of that made longer intentionally?
Right.
And the only way I'd be able to figure that out would be to drape fabric and recreate it
Right.
workroom. So for quoting purposes, I would quote it as if it's going to be a lot extra work than I think it is.
Again, this looks very simple. However, it would
However,
be a lot of work to even figure it out and then construct it properly.
yeah. And it kind of looks like maybe it's a room divider because the window looks a little funky, but so then there's a cornice box. How's it going to be installed under there? Can you Velcro it underneath there? Or do you put it on a board, mount the board underneath? All of those things. It would be a lot more information from just a drawing than a real life photo that I'd need to
Right.
know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So those descending tassels. I mean, can you even get cord tassels that long? Like really
Yeah.
long.
Yes.
Plus, if the customer had a window that was 32 inches wide, you're not going to get the same look.
No.
Right. Yeah. So it needs to be the right proportions. And again, you could print this out um, on graph paper and
Ah,
sort of base it on 8-foot ceilings and see what works out.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a challenge, those creative interpretations.
We all loved the Jackie Von Tobel book back in the day, but we all dreaded it because they were all drawings and we couldn't always make fabric do what Jackie had the vision for it to do. They're beautiful drawings and there's so much inspiration to be gained from it, but fabric doesn't always do exactly what you draw it doing.
Right. Right. And I'm guilty because I do a lot of sketching too. And
Yeah.
but at least I try to sketch with the knowledge that how's it going to be made. So
Yeah.
it has to be fabric. Uh,
Yes.
so this
This
is
is beautiful.
isn't this beautiful? This is from Studio Blackwell in the UK. And swags are coming back, so we need to start getting used to seeing them coming in for quoting again.
Mhm.
And I can see light shining through maybe slightly. So it's probably interlined
Right.
and lined. And I can count the number of folds for the tied back drapery and see that it's 1.5 widths each side. And then start thinking about the parts that I know how to make, the individual pieces. There's swags, there's horns or
Mm.
pleats, and there's rope cord knotted. There are jabots or tails, whatever you want to call those, tie backs, all these things that you can identify. So you start looking at all the different individual pieces.
Right.
Then sort of think of them. So this is my quick sketch, not to scale, okay? Just because it's on craft paper. But just me thinking, okay, how am I going to install this? There's a cornice box. The first thing I would put on the cornice box are the swags. And then I would put the tails, and then I would upholster the box. And then the last thing to go on would be the horns, and they'd be individual pieces.
That makes
So,
sense to me.
so now I can go back to that photo and you can kind of see that the twist cord is going to be covering
Yes.
where I staple fabric with tack strip and raised it up and
Right.
upholstered the top. And
And you
then
can see it's very well done, but there's a slight difference. Right
Mhm.
above that cord, it is flatter.
Yeah.
The swag itself has a little tiny bit of fullness. So they are separate pieces for sure.
Yeah, and it possibly the swags could have been all one piece that was wrapped up over the board and then an ant trail of
Mhm.
staples across. So that's also another approach. But for me, I would find it easier to upholster the top piece after I've stapled the swags on.
Yeah, agreed.
And I love this look. I like this better than swags going over the top of the board where
Yeah.
it's on top. I just think
Mhm.
it's such a pretty look.
Yeah, and I love the horns.
And then here's again looking at it in pieces. So
Mhm.
there's a heading box. There's well, first swags, and then a heading box, and then the jabos and tails, and then there's the pleats and horns. And I could tell that on the photo on the left, that horn on the left, you're just kind of
Mhm.
looking at it at a far angle. You can
Right.
see that that does look like a separate piece. Um,
Yes.
it could be incorporated into the jabot as a separate piece instead of three separate ones.
Right.
But you definitely know the one in the center is a separate piece.
Right. Right.
I would make them all separate. And
I think it would just be easier.
yeah, it absolutely would. And they would be finished on the inside, nicely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all that fringe is on
Oh,
there. Mm,
so pretty. And the tie backs.
yeah. And so you also have the proportions here. You can you can print it on graph paper and start looking at how long are the jabots and relation to the width.
Right.
And then, okay, the tiebacks are pretty low to give, that look. So
Mhm.
you can almost recreate this. I want to do it.
Yeah, I know. I know we're in the middle of recording a podcast, but I'm like overwhelmed looking at this and like, and how would you do this? And how would you do that?
I
I would
know.
love to have an opportunity to make something like that.
I know. I would too. I just think that would be really cool. So there's my drapery investigation 101. Maybe we'll do this again another time with some more
I
photos. If people wanted to send in photos, we could
Yeah,
do.
I think that's a great idea. When you sent me the notes for this, I said that I had had some photos and we decided not to use them, partly because it wasn't quite the same idea. But what I learned from that particular job is to ask a lot of questions. And we
Mhm.
talked about this in the confidence episode. The more questions you ask, the more you understand. The designer had sent me a Jackie Von Tobel drawing. And what we ended up with looked nothing like it. She just liked the sheer that you could see on the edge. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to sew 12 inches of sheer to an end of a panel. No, 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 no. It was nothing like that. But I only figured that out after asking a lot of questions. And
Yeah.
that's a good detective, is asking all those questions. And sometimes our clients, designers, or homeowners show us pictures and say, oh, I love this. What about it do you love? Let's get very
Yes.
specific here.
Yeah, and sometimes you want to be like Columbo, just sort of like bumbling through where you're really being smart, but you're kind of acting like
Yeah.
you don't really know what's going on.
Yes, exactly.
Just
And
asking a lot of dumb questions.
well, because I think that sometimes that when people are looking at things, they only see part of it. And
Mhm.
we're already thinking about the installation and the fabrication and everything else. So the way we ask our questions leads them to be thinking along the same lines that we are. It's our job to do this, but at the same time, just giving that opportunity to say, well, if we do this, and they go, oh, but that's not what I want. So I think it's really important to phrase the questions properly and ask as many as we can.
Yeah. And I love getting images
Yeah.
because, when somebody just says, I want this, I want it swoopy and I want it longer on this end. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, so we do want to get good images and
Yes.
then we have to go from there and do our detective work.
And there are ways to look on Google. There's Google Lens. There's a couple different ways to search the internet when you have just a photo. In fact, there's a conversation in the forum right now going on about how to find things, and people put some good advice in there. Just Google, how do I do image searches, and you'll get the information that you need, because that did lead you to those blog posts
Yeah.
to learn more about those window treatments. So then we look like the geniuses because we found it and we know everything about it.
I do that a lot with fabrics when I'm quoting because I want to see the fabric used.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm quoting a job and it says what the vertical and horizontal repeat is, but I want to see what it looks like on a drapery or on a pillow already. So it's really helpful.
Yeah, it can look very different in real life.
So I hope this episode will help people think like a detective. And if you're new and starting out, you can start practicing on photos. It doesn't have to be for a real customer.
This was fun. I have never printed anything on graph paper. I'm going to be trying that one.
Cool.
I
Great.
think that's great. So thank you, Susan.
All right. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye, Susan.